Today we're talking about the journey of leadership, and a journey it is. But we'll talk today about some new signposts and perhaps a different map for that journey than you have seen before or thought of before. And this is a journey that could lead you all the way to being a CEO. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast, you could be with us in the future live on your favorite social media channel, or perhaps one of your favorite social media channels. You can find out when those are happening so you can join us and get some other inside scoops about the show by going to either our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn. Today's episode is brought to you by my upcoming book, the second edition. Actually, by the time some of you hear this, it will not be upcoming. It will be out. The second edition of The Long Distance Leader, Revised Rules for Remarkable Remote and Hybrid Leadership. If you lead a team that is distributed in any way, this book will give you new skills, insights, and the confidence to lead more effectively in the new world of work. You can learn more and get your copy at remarkablepodcast.com/LDL. It'll point you to where you can get your copy. So now let me bring in my guest. Let me make an organizational move here on my side so I can still read his bio. Our guest today is Hans-Werner Kaas. He is the co-dean of the CEO program, the Bauer Forum, a former member of its Global Client Council, and a senior partner emeritus at McKinsey. In 1991, he joined McKinsey's Frankfurt office, moved to the Cleveland office in 1997, and co-founded the Detroit office in 1998, where he still lives. He works with and counsels CEOs and leaders across multiple industry sectors globally. He's the co-author, this is why he's here, of the new book, The Journey of Leadership. There it is, The Journey of Leadership, How CEOs Learn to Lead from the Inside Out. Welcome to the show. So glad that you're here. We had the chance to chat briefly ahead of time. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you, Kevin, and appreciate the time with you and hosting me and frankly, hosting our book as well.
Yes, and you are a co-author. There are four of you altogether, but you drew the short straw to have to be on with me today. Listen, let's just start here. I gave the very brief intro to your career. Tell us a little bit about the journey. How did you end up being involved with CEO leadership? Just tell us really briefly sort of how you ended up here. You probably didn't expect when you were a 10-year-old, this is where you'd end up, right? So just a little bit about the backstory, would you?
Yeah, happy to do so, Kevin. So in terms of a little bit my own, call it life story or professional story, I grew up in Germany, finished high school. At the time, I had always a strong interest and bias in engineering and science, and with a small detour from an initially actually planned but then stopped military career, I ended up studying mechanical engineering and business administration. And that combination already reveals something about me. I was on the one hand always interested in finding scientific engineering-based solution. The more we could apply, or I could apply math, the more I was actually fascinated. But over time, even still when I pursued my master's degree and did different internships at companies like Daimler-Benz at the time, but also McKinsey and Company already, where I did an internship in 1989 in their Munich office, I observed leaders and obviously partners, senior partners, and how they were interacting with leaders. And what it revealed to me was that the scientific answers to business problems are only one answer. The other answer is indeed how you engage your team, your broader organization, not only to co-develop a good answer, the right solution for business opportunities or problems, business problems, but also how to align and excite people and help them personally to grow. And doing all that, not only seeing them as people you interact with because they are a colleague. No, first and foremost, they're human beings. You need to point that out and actually embrace that and act accordingly. So that actually brought me quickly to McKinsey, where I joined, as you said, in the Frankfurt office, worked there 6 years. I was fascinated by serving technology or automotive focused companies. Came to the US because I wanted to venture a little bit out and try something which I have not done, and learning much more about the United States and frankly also the business practices, which at that time already was obviously, you can say, always a testing ground for innovative and creative solutions. So I came to Cleveland, spent there 1.5 years, and then I was fascinated because a colleague of mine, a partner colleague, asked me and said, "You seem to know something about automotive and other industries. We plan to open a Detroit office. We are not present there." And I already started serving clients in Detroit in actually 97 and 98. And he said, "Would you be interested in joining me and 5 other colleagues?" And I have to say, Kevin, I probably thought about it 20 seconds and I said yes. Later on,
And you've been in Detroit ever since.
I'm Detroit ever since. Afterwards, I called my wife and said, "By the way, we will move to Detroit. We'll not move back to Germany from Cleveland." I already said yes. I mean, by the way, had she forced me, I probably could have reversed my answer, but I was really not at all intending to reverse my answer. So this is where I landed up in Detroit. And then over the years, that fundamental insight at the beginning that the much harder problems to crack is aligning leaders and broader organizations and also inspiring them. A lot has been written about followership and inspirational leadership. Frankly, in our own firm, inspirational leadership is something we put significant emphasis on all the time. But we have not really cracked the code how to become an aspirational leader who can create followership and leading to personal growth, not only for the organization, but also personal growth for the individual, the people you're interacting with, you're working with. And by the way, that's not only colleagues, it can be external business partners, first and foremost, customers, suppliers, other stakeholders, etc. So that's why I put the interest in leadership really at my focus area, in my focus area over the last literally 8-9 years. And I joined our Bauer Forum team, and my friend and colleague Ramesh is the co-dean alongside me. I joined that team in 2016 and learned how to actually coach and counsel CEOs in a very small, private, confidential setting with only 3 to 5 per 2-day seminar event, and got even more fascinated by it. So this is how I ended up with being fascinated and immersing myself day by day in leadership.
You know, it's interesting. I ask that question often, and many times it really does lead the audience to get a sense not only of who you are, but like where you are. And having read the book, and we're talking with Hans-Werner Kaas, one of the authors of The Journey of Leadership, and really, you've just outlined in many ways the book. You've outlined this idea that it takes more than technical expertise to be a highly effective leader, CEO, that your focus has been around CEOs, and we'll sort of pull back from that before we're done, but we'll stay there for now. One of the things you say early, and you know, we are roughly contemporaries age-wise, close enough for the purposes of this conversation. And one of the phrases that you guys use is, and the examples you used in the book were names that immediately crossed my mind as well. But you talk about the fall of the Imperial CEO. I love that phrase. So let's just talk about that, because not everyone who's watching or listening has the time perspective that you and I have. But I think it's a useful, and it's a useful conversation, but it also sets up to where I want to take our conversation. So tell us what you mean by that, and how that's impacted what it means to be an effective leader, CEO.
Yeah. So let me turn back a little bit in history. When you go back in the 90s, and I'm pretty sure many of our listeners will recall names like Lee Iacocca, who actually once was a leader at Ford Motor Company, got displaced there, joined Chrysler, became a legendary CEO at Chrysler. Many or all of us know Jack Welch, the indeed called it legendary Imperial CEO at General Electric. And they were truly larger than life figures, almost along the lines, does not matter what the business problem is, these larger than life CEOs will always solve the problem. And many in their organizations looked up to them as an undisputed perfect role model. Now, as we all know, when you study them a bit more closely, like all of us, we have strengths, we have weaknesses, development needs, and we try to improve and really try to bring that forward, not only to help ourselves, but ultimately you want to help your teams and your organization. That is what we call also selfless leadership. When you look at these figures, however, Kevin, when we did our research, also informed by the many Bauer Forum CEO seminars, which are a major source of insight for our book, we noticed that these imperial CEOs of the past were much less embracing what we call human-centric leadership, which means first and foremost being really human beings, understanding the needs of their direct team members, of their members in their large organization, whether you work in a marketing department, whether you work in an engineering lab, whether you work in a production line at the front line, or you're a supervisor, shift supervisor in the manufacturing facility. And that notion and criticality of human-centric leadership, we missed that in those imperial CEOs. And when we did more and more our research, we also noticed that CEOs we worked with over the years, they did evolve. The CEOs who indeed attend the Bauer Forum, and they usually attend our 2-day CEO leadership development program when they're in their early or mid tenure as a CEO. Sometimes we have later tenure CEOs, but usually it's early tenure, mid tenure CEOs. And almost 60% of the topics they have chosen. And we really encourage and actually request from the participating CEOs to choose the 2 or 3 topics which are top on their mind to be a more effective leader, is much more around the personal leadership model and the personal operating model. It's less strategy. Yes, sometimes strategy topics do come up as well. And that gave us a clear conviction, I would almost say a trigger, to rethink what is the nature of the CEO in today's modern times.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. As I read your book, and obviously the journey that I've been on doing the work that we do is not the same as yours, and yet I work with leaders at all levels, including CEOs. And as I'm reading your book, I spent most of my time nodding my head, both at the stories and sort of the overall framework. And I'd like to talk about the framework a little bit, because the subtitle of the book says "How CEOs Learn to Lead from Inside Out." So I'd like you to tell us, what do you mean by that? And as you know, then we'll sort of get into this sort of what I would call the 2 stages of your human-centric model. But what do you mean by leading from the inside and learning from the inside out?
Yeah, so the inside out process, the 2 key words are inside, your inner life, understanding yourself before you can actually lead outside, which means leading your teams, leading your product organization, leading other stakeholders. Let me start with the inside. It is absolutely paramount and required and critical that you understand your own leadership traits, and we would even say human traits. That's why we call it human-centric leadership. Humility, self-reflection, self-awareness, vulnerability, but also resilience, confidence, determination, etc. And that insight assessment starts with self-awareness. And self-awareness means, what leader are you actually today? And you will need to do that in 2 ways. You should indeed gather feedback. People you work with, not only people you work with, can be friends, can be your spouse, people who know you very well and are in your, call it, closer or expanded circle. At the same time, you need to then start to self-reflect. Where are the areas you need to improve? Where are areas you actually are already well developed in terms of your leadership and character traits? And understand and develop your own, what we call, in the book, we call it the commitment plan, which is actually a tangible plan at the 3rd day of the Power Forum. And at times we even use the word reinvention. There are certain elements we need to reinvent because they were connected in the past. But you need to adopt and embrace them to be a more effective leader. Once you have done that self-assessment with your own internal self-improvement roadmap, then you can be effectively a better leader in leading others. Lead yourself first, which is indeed part 1, the first 6 chapters, before you lead others, the second part of the book.
Well, we'll get to the second part. I want to stay in the first part for a minute,
Sure.
if we can. And I really appreciate that you talked about the self-reflection part, or the self-assessment part, broader than just self. Because one of the great things about the book is, at the end of every chapter, both the inside chapters and the outside chapters,
True, true.
you ask some really excellent self-reflective questions. And I think any leader who asks those questions of themselves is going to learn stuff. Any human would do the same. However, all the research says that we think we're more self-aware than we actually are. So even though those are great questions, I'm really glad that you mentioned the fact that we need to get some other feedback too. Sometimes the focus ends up being only about getting that other feedback and no one's taking any time to think about themselves. But because I think the book does such a good job, and you've done such a good job just now of talking about the self side, what would be some advice you would give around, especially at a higher leadership level as a CEO, about getting that honest truth telling, we'll get to that phrase later, feedback?
Yeah.
What would be some advice you'd give there?
Yeah. So it's very important that you create an atmosphere which is fostering, bringing honest feedback to you. If there is any element of an, call it even punitive nature in the company's or any institution's culture, it is very hard to get honest feedback, because people who bring you the honest feedback, that could be the executive assistant who is working with the CEO. It could be the chief of staff. It could be the head of strategy. It could be head of a business unit, people you're interacting with, he or she. So if you're not creating that atmosphere for honest and open messaging and feedback, and rewarding open and messaging and feedback, it is very hard to get honest feedback. And then the chain of self-awareness, self-reflection breaks down already in the first step. So that atmosphere
Exactly.
is
That's
so
why I
critical.
wanted to take a second there.
Exactly. And how to practically do that? Frankly, you can do that in one-on-one settings when you are sitting down with your chief of human resources, with the business unit leader, etc. You can even do it with your executive assistant, because the executive assistant, he or she has great
They
insights
might
into
have
your
the
life.
best input of all.
Other
Right?
law, the best input of your own, and invite their feedback. And you need to create an atmosphere that people do not feel as if they would be facing somehow negative consequences if they're honest with you. So, and that requires real role modeling, and it's more than role modeling in the moment itself. Constant demonstration of the right inviting behavior is critical. And really coming even a few days or weeks back to that person, say, by the way, thank you that you actually offered me that bit tougher, inconvenient feedback for me at first sight, because it's only inconvenient at first sight. It actually helps you.
Yeah. And so I would just add two things. One is the extension of what you just said, which is thanks for that. Here's what I'm doing with that input. And the
Exactly.
other one is, I think one of the ways we make it safer, it's not the only way, as you described several, is to ask frequently. The
Absolutely.
more often we ask, the more earnestly they will believe that we truly are we really want to know, we want to be vulnerable, etc. So we're talking about the inside first, and you mentioned that there were 6 pieces to that, and the one that I would like us to chat about. Well, I have one I'd like us to chat about, but
No, please go ahead, Kevin. Absolutely.
I will, I promise. But I'm kind of curious which one you find maybe senior leaders and CEOs most often get stuck on, or is there one that, for whatever reason today, you'd like to talk about?
So there are 2 which I might pick out of the first 6 themes or chapters. On the one hand, humility is a real critical one. And humility, in my view, at times it is a little bit an overused terminology, because many people say, oh, I got humbled by this experience. I try to be more humble. That is true. But real humility admits first and foremost that you as a leader, or even as a person, you have deficiencies and shortcomings, and you can partially address them, and you should address them based on the feedback conversation we just had. But you should also admit and invite that the collective group, and solving problems of whatever nature, the collective group is much, much stronger and much better equipped. This is why I still like humility so much, because it is very fundamental. And when you show and role model humble behavior, Kevin, I was always deeply, and even today, deeply impressed how you invite suddenly the collaboration and proactive behavior. You can call it entrepreneurship, whatever you want, in different areas of people. They suddenly flourish. They suddenly say, I want to help you. Oh, you invited me to help you? I'm all yours. I'm really excited to help you. So that's why humility is one of the favorites. The other one I would point out, we're describing it in chapter 6. We talk about versatility and the versatile leader. And what is
That was the
fascinating,
one that I wanted to get to. So we
yeah,
said,
here you go. So I give you a quick
go ahead.
introduction, and then you should offer your point of view, please, Kevin. When we started out, I admit we had maybe a bit more of a narrowly defined interpretation, actually, of versatility. We thought about it and looked at different CEOs, not only the 24, which are featured and interviewed in our book. And we thought, well, versatility is something like a skill set. And it is. By the way, it is also a skill set. Whether you are a strong operations leader, you are a business grower, a business builder, you are great at solving strategic problems. So you can play in a versatile manner across different themes and key requirements for any leader or any CEO. However, as we wrote the book, over the last, especially the last 12 months, we learned that versatility also means practicing different leadership operating styles. So at times I have to be, call it humble, listening, inviting, but there are also times and situations where I should do it, but at the same time, I need to convey confidence and determination to my organization and my team. And we call them balancing act or reconciling polarities is so important in that. And I have to give credit here to my co-author, very much appreciated, Dana Mayor. She has been emphasizing that theme of balancing acts as a leader in terms of the leadership operating style significantly. So I've been learning along the way and said, yeah, that versatility theme actually applies as well to the leadership style.
And I have a bit of a reason for wanting to thinking about that one. It's because it's really the focus of my next book that comes out next March, called Flexible Leadership, and it's very much about that idea. And you're talking about polarities. I call them flexors. And as you said, there's absolutely a skill set here, but there's also a mindset here. Right. And I think that one of the things that happens is we get, especially by the time we've gotten to the C-suite, that, well, this is how I lead. This is my style. This is my approach. And the world is far too complex for us to just lean into one of those things, because it's not always in context going to be the best approach. So I really loved, for other reasons as well, but I thought some really great stuff in that chapter, because humility, super important. Confidence, super important. Selflessness, which is a phrase that I use all of the time, 100%. You know, vulnerability and resilience get talked about and have been written about a lot. But to end with that one on the inside, on the self-reflective side, I think is a really useful one. I'm watching our time, but I want us to get to the second half of the book. You got 6 more ways that we basically take where we are and use that to influence others, influence the business. Talk about those 6 just really quickly. I'll throw them up on the screen.
So happy to do so, Kevin. So in part 2 of the book, we basically translate what you have embraced, immersed yourself in the first 6 chapters, or 6 critical leadership. I also like to call them character traits, not only leadership traits.
Yep.
And how you apply them when you lead your team and your organization. So, and it's a combination of, on the one hand, certain themes you're very well aware of. Courage and boldness, but boldness not without any thoughtful conditions, because even the word boldness, inspire boldness, has been overused at times. You have to be bold in a certain situation, and others you might actually hold back a little bit. Again, concept of balancing acts as a leader. Then the other one is what we call control is an illusion. You cannot really control what people do, even if, think about it, you have a small company you're leading, maybe only consisting of 20 people. by no means every day you can control the behavior of any of those 20 when they're interact with a supplier, with a customer, with another colleague. So establishing what we call thoughtful and authentic empowerment is very critical, and guiding organization by purpose, and frankly also by, if you wish, a code of conduct or values, and different organizations have different words for that, is so critical. The other notion, and I'm just picking a few in that moving beyond yourself section in part 2 of the book, is fearless learning. And let me give you a very brief story why I got fascinated with fearless learning. Even though continuous learning has been written 25 plus years, the learning organization, et cetera, et cetera. You know all the big management leaders who have published books about that. But one of the 24 contributors is a retired US Navy Admiral, Eric Olson. He is by trade or by education a US Navy SEAL. And he rose through the ranks of the Navy, including leading all Navy SEAL teams, and eventually became the head of the U.S. Special Operations Command, Special Operations Forces Command, 2007 to 2011, which means all Special Operations Forces were under his leadership, from Navy SEALs, Delta Force, Army Rangers. And I got to know Eric simply because he was already a few years ago a senior advisor at McKinsey, and by sheer coincidence, he was a CEO of a startup in Southeast Michigan and Farmington Hills, not far away from where you grew up, from where I live today. And I learned a lot from him as I tried to extract the key lessons he has had as such a senior military leader, and certainly dangerous missions, dangerous assignments, et cetera, et cetera. And the notion he framed was, Hans-Werner, you need to make sure you create an environment, or any leader creates an environment of fearless learning. And what it means is the word fearless is obviously critical. You have to be ready to give up your long-held beliefs and assumptions if the external environment around you is changing. Not easy to do, because many of us, we try to be somehow right and say, let's, here are the guiding principles we looked at. We developed that plan. It might still work out. No, at times you have to abandon the plan. And
this relates to our conversation about versatility, right?
It's the same thing around versatility. You have to be versatile to do that.
Connected to that. In the book, you talk about the Osama bin Laden raid,
which he described in, I would say, in an appropriate depth. Obviously, there are certain boundaries which he, as a former military leader, still needs to respect. He cannot share all the details,
of course. But it gave us an interesting insight. As a reader, gave us an interesting insight into the very point that you're making, because it didn't all go the way they thought it would, not even close, actually.
No,
I mean, that if I'd heard some of that, I didn't remember it. It was like,
look, I mean, they lost the first of the 2 Black Hawk helicopters. And by the way, those were, call it, special helicopters for different reasons we don't need to go into right now and here. But that is right. But there was not only of course, there were backup plans existing, but the acting Navy SEALs, as well as those aviators of that first helicopter and the second one and the other one which was called in, they also looked at what we call at the terrain, at the territory, and how it was changing within minutes, within a few hours. It was actually within minutes, to be honest. Right. And Eric has coined that term, which he says, when the map differs from the terrain, go always with the terrain. And the map is the long-held set of assumptions and long-held beliefs. We say, I do not want to give up. No, you have to be versatile enough, connecting with the former conversation, Kevin, we had, to give it up.
So I had this conversation with Lisa, my producer, earlier today about, we were looking at some other books and who we were going to invite to join us. And I said to her, not everyone that listens to us are CEOs, and the word CEO is right in the title. And obviously the conversation we've been having, everybody, has been about CEOs. But I want to ask you a question, because not everyone is one. Not everyone that's listening is going to be one. And yet I'm right with the fact that all of this stuff applies at all levels. So before we start to go into the back part of our conversation, what advice do you have, or what comment would you have about any of the stuff we've talked about? if someone's not the CEO?
Yeah. So let me actually relate it back to the main title of the book. The reason why we actually did choose the title, The Journey of Leadership, and not the journey of a CEO. This is exactly the reason. Everything we have researched, and including with the stories and insights we are sharing, is applicable to any leader. Whether you're a marketing head or whether you're a supervisor, shift leader in a large automotive or aerospace factory, those lessons all apply. Everybody of us, even in your small, call it family circle, it helps to self-reflect, be self-aware, and get some input while you then integrate the input and need to develop your own, call it plan, commitment plan for adopting changes. This is why we are so strong about the leader and not only the CEO. And we try to make that pragmatic, Kevin, in two ways. First way is what you just mentioned a few minutes ago. At the end of each of the 12 chapters, we have a small box with key questions. This is, in our view, a pragmatic tool, an actionable tool for self-assessment. By the way, you can invite others to indeed give you some feedback on those questions. Because
using those exact questions.
Exactly. Yeah. Use the same questions. Show it to your spouse, to your best friend, to your executive team member, to your chief human resource officer, whoever. And then in the appendix of the book, and admittedly, appendices of books are easily overlooked because they have an appendix and people say, I have a hard enough time to read all the chapters. Now you want me to actually take a look at the appendix? Our answer to that is yes, please do. Please do. Because in the appendix, structured in 3 buckets, lead yourself, lead your team, and lead the broad organization, we have written down what we call micro habits, micro practices, micro habits, which we as 4 authors, plus our 24 contributors and others, frankly, we have to say, in the expanded McKinsey leadership domain, have collected. And we boiled it down to a few, which in my view, in our view, are a bit more menu style, because some might be more relevant for you than certain other ones, depending on the operating context you have. So 2 ways to make it actionable.
So before we finish, we sort of started with you personally, and we'll sort of end there as well. So I'm curious, what do you do for fun?
So what I do for fun, a few things. I love to travel. On the one hand, that came naturally because as a McKinsey guy, you have to travel. And my clients in automotive, in technology, industrial or aerospace defense, they were always global. So I had the opportunity to travel and work always in a global business context. I appreciate that. But on the other hand, I find personal private travel with my wife, my spouse, and my kids or friends as exciting, because you put your own agenda together and you're not driven by a business agenda. So just recently, Kevin, we came back Sunday a week ago. We spent 10 days in southern Italy, Sorrento coast, Amalfi coast. We visited Pompeii. We visited Naples. We spent, of course, a few days in Tuscany visiting a former McKinsey colleague there. And I'm always fascinated by immersing myself in history. So travel for me has insights into not only joy, etc., but also immersing myself in culture and history. This is why I like to travel. What else do I do? I'm a very passionate tennis player. And given I have now, obtained or now in the emeritus status, I would say I have a bit more time in terms of self-control, even though my calendar, my priorities have nicely filled up already. But I actually want to advance my own tennis play. And I follow a little bit the inside-out approach. There are certain things also in the mental setup which I have to improve before I can be an effective partner, even playing a double. So the tennis is that. And then third, I actually want to read more. I always felt a little bit over the last few years that reading outside of business literature fell a little bit short. So things around politics, history. So I'm getting a bit more in the catch-up game, among other things. But I always had, when I engage in reading, I had always a big desire and passion for history and politics, because they determine the path of our societies. And we have quite a few tasks, depending in which country you live, but also globally ahead of us.
Well, since you brought up reading, what are you reading these days?
So, a couple of things. First of all, I love the book Outlive by Peter Attia, who has really developed a very insightful combination of scientific but also pragmatic insights around longevity. And he talks about health span and lifespan. And it is really an actionable practical advice. And it is a very holistic, in my view, because it covers not only the themes you and I are aware of in terms of workout regimes, exercise, nutrition. It talks a lot about actually psychology and mental health as well, and combining that to become a more happier, a more, call it, a complete human being, I find fascinating. So that is one I just read. I now have started to read Democracy Awakening from Heather Cox Richardson. She is a history professor at Boston College, and she also has her different podcasts. She writes a newsletter every day, which I'm diligently reading. It's usually the first thing, Kevin, I pick up in the morning. It's not the news on different media or stream broadcasting services. And then the third one I've not started, but I want to read is Farid Zakaria, The Age of Revolutions. And I'm a big follower of him. I watch his, not only his Sunday show he hosts, the GPS show he hosts, but also he writes columns in different media outlets. And I think he is a great analyst in terms of understanding and disaggregating complex dynamics, and also offering at least some, directional perspectives. So those three probably give you a little bit an idea of what I'm fascinated by.
I love that. Well, thank you for sharing those, and we'll make
Yeah.
sure everybody that those are in the show notes as well as information about the journey of leadership. But before we close, anything else? Where do you want to point people? Where can people learn more about you or the book? Where do you want to point people before we wrap up? For those watching, I'll hold the book up again.
Absolutely. You should indeed hold up there. There are different ways. On the one hand, yes, obvious, that's the obvious suggestion. Please read the book. Will be published September 10th. You can pre-order it. But in addition, if you go to McKinsey.com, we have actually already published 2 articles which are extracts of key messages and insights from the book. The one came out mid-June about personal growth. That's more a summary version of an article. Just yesterday, Kevin, you will like to hear that. We did publish an article about versatility in itself. So chapter 6, that is on McKinsey.com. And those are, great, I would call it, resources people should access to. We continue to publish certain themes or pick a certain theme and relate to it on different LinkedIn posts as well, and including my 3 co-authors, but also our head of publishing at McKinsey, Raju Narisetti. And last but not least, feel free to approach the authors. Nothing wrong with that.
All right. I appreciate that. Thank you. Before we wrap up, everybody, and before I give you some final thoughts and final thank yous, the question that I ask you all as listeners every single week is very simple. The question is, now what? What action will you take? And because listening to this is fine, but if you have a spouse or significant other, you know that fine isn't always awesome. Like, the way to get the most from this, everybody, is to take action. And the only way to take action is to translate the insights that you got and turn them into actions you will take. And so it's my hope that you will do that. When you do that, this will have been a greater value to you, which is really the point that brought both of us here to have this conversation. So Hans-Werner Kaas, thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure to have you. It was a pleasure to have this conversation. And thanks again for being here.
Kevin, thank you for the dialogue, for the conversation. Truly enjoyed it. And as the last part in the book says, the conclusion chapter, the journey never ends.
100%. And so the journey never ends, everybody. And never is a long time, but I don't see any time soon when the Remarkable Leadership podcast is going to end either. I know for sure it'll be here next week. And so make sure you come back and join us next week for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership podcast.
Thank you.